All right, we are picking up with the CW Part 2 D7-8 review, 2-column proofs. This is the second part of the classwork assignment. We did Part 1 on Tuesday, Wednesday, and this is the Part 2. For those who had class Tuesday, this is something you're doing in class on Thursday. For those of you who had class Wednesday, this was assigned for you to do as your independent practice for your homework. So this is to kind of help you on any of the more tricky bits. It won't 100% tell you exactly what to do, but it will kind of help you, guide you through it a bit. So we're going to look at this proof here. It says to accurately mark the proof. Remember that each of our proofs will have 3 parts, 3 pairs of things to mark. So 3 angle and or side pairs. Some of those may already be marked. For my purposes, I'm going to remark those to really emphasize we should always have 3 things marked to have fully marked something. Okay? When we have overlapping triangles, it is helpful, and only with overlapping triangles, it is helpful to trace those triangles. Please just do that with yellow for one triangle and blue for the other. And it's helpful to do that with a lightened opacity. It makes it a highlighter, if possible. So I'm going to do that first, and I use the line tool so it's nice and straight. So I'm just going to choose one triangle to trace. Notice that this triangle with this side is going to go here. That's my first triangle. I'm going to do blue for my other triangle. Right? Only for overlapping triangles. Another thing to just emphasize is that when for the quiz you are marking, make sure you're using a full opacity. Make sure you're using one of these top 3 line thicknesses. Don't use the very thinnest one. It is hard for me to see to grade the thinner ones. And make sure that you're using one of the 3 darkest colors. That would be the purple, the red, or the black. Yellow and green and blue, these in the middle are really hard for me to see to try to grade. So the black is good, red is good, purple is good. So I'm going to use the purple because that just kind of stands out from everything. And I'm going to work us through one at a time. And then when we're marking statements, we are marking statements that are statements of congruency, so not definitions, and only statements that are angle pair congruencies or segment congruencies. So you'll see number 4 is a triangle congruency. We don't mark a triangle congruency. We mark an angle pair congruency or a segment pair congruency. So I'm going to start with number 1. They tell us angle U is congruent to angle S. So here I have angle U. Whoops, that is a line, so I need to turn that off. Also make sure for your quiz, the only marks should be the marks that are being graded. If you are adding anything else, that removes a point from your grade, because I don't know if that indicates that there is something you think exists that doesn't, and it indicates a misunderstanding. And then make sure your arcs are curved. So when this says angle U is congruent to angle S, you don't have to remark this because it's already marked, but I'm going to. Angle U is congruent to angle S. Then they tell me, so that's one congruency pair. They tell me for number 2, segment QU is congruent to segment QS. These are segments, so I should mark those with ticks. And QU is this long blue segment. Please go in the middle of the segment. Don't go way up here, down here, or it's going to look like you think it's an angle. Be bold and go in the middle of the segment. Segment QU. Since this is my first segment, it should be a single segment mark. is congruent to segment QS. Segment QS. One tick mark per segment, a single tick mark because it is my first segment. And then finally, for my third congruency pair, I have angle Q is congruent to angle Q. Now, this is my third congruency pair, but it's only my second angle that I'm marking. Because it's my second angle that I'm marking, I'm going to use two arcs. This is angle Q. If I only used one arc mark, it might look like this angle was congruent, the same as these two. And that is not what my proof says. So I cannot just leave this here. I need to add the second arc mark. At this point, I have fully marked my proof. Okay, I fully marked my proof. I have marked one pair of angles, number one pair of segments, number 2, and a second pair of angles, which is that Q is congruent to itself, which is why it's only showing up the one time. And again, you can check the rubric to see that I need all 3 pairs of marks. Now, one of those marks was already there. If you didn't place it, that's fine, but it needs to be placed for full credit. And we can click OK and move on to the next step. Now, number 2 asks us to give the reason. We are now giving the reason for all 4 parts of this proof. So we need to go through each reason. And for our number 1 reason, and we're going to kind of ignore the first parts here and really pay attention to the numbers on the red. Our number 1 reason is always, always, always given. I will make sure your proofs are always set up that way. Our number 1 reason should always be given. And in this case, angle A is congruent to angle S. We can look back at the proof. It is given because that was pre-marked on the proof. So it was pre-marked on the proof. That is a given. It was given to us as marked on the proof. That is a given. For our number 2 reason, well, our number 2 statement was segment QU is congruent to segment QS. Well, why is segment QU congruent to segment QS? We look back at the proof. Well, they tell us segment QU is congruent to segment QS. That is another way of being given the information. If they tell us QU is congruent to QS, they are giving us, it is given, it is assumed for the purposes of this problem that QU is congruent to QS. So our number 2 reason is also given. The number 3 is angle Q is congruent to angle Q. Ooh, too big. Angle Q is congruent to angle Q. Now, why? And I mentioned this in class. Made everyone in all 3 periods be quiet long enough for me to say this. But whenever something is congruent to itself, it's like it's looking at itself in the mirror. It is looking at its reflection. It is seeing itself exactly. When you look in the mirror to see exactly yourself, exactly the same self, not here, where QU is congruent to QS, that's similar but not identical. But here, absolutely the identical same thing. When you are seeing your reflection in the mirror, that is a reflective property. And because here it is angle Q is congruent to angle Q, that reflexive property is a reflexive property angles, because it is a reflexive property applied to angles. We should not give reflexive property segments if it is about a statement for angles, all right? So we can see this here. It is literally because angle Q is congruent to itself. It is playing itself for both the blue triangle and it is playing itself for the yellow triangle. Okay. Then finally, reason number 4, why then are these triangles congruent to each other? And for that, we look at our diagram and we just look, it's helpful to just pay attention to one of the triangles. I'm going to look at triangle blue, my blue triangle. What do I know about this triangle? Well, I know 1, 2 angles, and I know a side. So I know 2 angles and a side, and I need to ask myself, is that side included between the angles, or is it excluded outside the angles? And that will help me determine, is this angle side or angle side angle? So you're going to work that out yourself and figure that out. And you can check that with a neighbor, and if you have a few minutes before we move forward, you can doodle before the video moves us forward on to number 7 if you're doing this in class. And I will check all of the doodles for those of you who use these. So go ahead and take a moment to say hi. I'm just going to choose SSS. This is wrong. Don't do this. I'll be able to tell who isn't listening and is just doing whatever is on the video because you're going to put SSS. And it's definitely not SSS. It is not SSS. Don't put SSS. All right, moving on to number 7. Okay, so number 7 says accurately mark the proof. And we're going to go in to show our work. Now remember, we are only marking proofs, items in the proof that are a pair of segment congruencies or a pair of angle congruencies, and there will always be 3 of them. I'm going to erase this dot because it is not an angle congruency mark or a segment congruency mark. So I'm going to look at number 1. Is this an angle congruency or segment congruency? No. So it is not something that I'll mark. Then I'll look at number 2, and that is a segment congruency. It is RT. Segment RT is congruent to segment RS. And since they're segments, I'm going to use a tick mark. And RT is here, and RS is here. And again, put those nice and boldly in the center of the segment. And since that's my first segment, 1 tick mark. And then number 3, I have angle SRU is congruent to angle TRU. Some of us are still struggling with our 3-letter angle names, but the easiest way for the purpose of this quiz, and we'll need to work on these, we need to grow in them if it's still a struggle, but focus on that center letter. That is the vertex. This is about angle R. So I'm going to go to angle R, and we're saying this angle is congruent to this angle. And because that is my first angle that I'm marking congruent, it gets 1 arc mark. And then I move on to number 4, and this is that segment RU is congruent to segment RU. So this is segment RU. This is my second segment congruency statement, so it needs not just 1 tick mark, but 2 tick marks, so I know it is not equal in measure to these. And notice that it is looking in the mirror at its identical self, so when I get here, I should know I have a reflexive property coming up. So I want to be paying attention to that, okay? So this is how my diagram should be looking, and checking my rubric, I'll notice I should have 3 pairs of marks placed, and in this case I do. I have this segment pair, I have a second segment pair, and then I have an angle pair. That makes 3 pairs of marks. That is all I should have on my diagram for grading for the quiz. And then here I am giving the reasons for my statements. Remember, number 1 is always, always, always given. And in fact, RU bisects angle SRT is literally a thing they told me. That means I was given it. And number 2, I listed for you because to keep my numbers even, I just wanted to have you give me 4 of the reasons. So I gave the 5th, well, one of the 5, which is that segment RT is congruent to segment RS. That's reason number 2. They also gave us that. They tell us that. Number 3 is the one that will likely be the most challenging for most people, which is that angle SRU is congruent to angle TRU. And I am not going to fill this in here for those who might try to shortcut by not actually watching the video, listening to the video. But we're going to go back into the diagram for a moment so I can explain this, okay? So how did we get this third statement here, that angle SRU is congruent to angle TRU? They don't tell me congruency up here. It wasn't pre-marked on my diagram. So where did that statement come from? Why is angle SRU congruent to angle TRU? And if we think back to the proof blocks that we've done in class, what we would find is that, and really like look at this and go, well, where else do we see SRU, TRU, RU, and see this RU and RU? Look at this RU. Where else is RU showing up? Well, I'm going to kind of thin my line thickness here a bit. Where else does RU show up? Well, RU also shows up here. You notice that? This RU is this RU, and RU is also in these angles here because this RU bisects this SRT, and when we bisected this SRT, it created this SRU and this TRU. So where did number 3 come from? Well, it came from number 1. SRU is congruent to TRU because we took SRT and cut it in half with RU. That was our scissors that sliced it. So why are these congruent? Because this angle was bisected by RU. What do we call that when an angle is bisected? What do we call that when an angle is bisected? What do we call that when an angle is bisected? I'm saying it really fast so that the captions don't pick that up and people actually listen. What do we call that when an angle is bisected? All right, so there's your number 3. And then our number 4 reason, RU is looking in the mirror. It is looking at its own blank, and it is a segment. So that would be a what, property of what. There's your hint for number 10. Okay, and then number 5, this is going to be our triangle congruency reason. You can look back at our triangle, go, okay, how many sides do I know? For one triangle, let's just focus on one triangle. Grab a different color here. Don't mark yours up with all the junk that I have. This is just me pointing out. Okay, look at just one triangle. How many sides do you know? How many angles do you know? If there's something you only have one of, is it included between the other two, or is it excluded? And use that to help you determine your reason number 5. All right, so that is my guidance to help you work through this assignment. If you're in period 6, I will be checking in on these at least once every 8 hours or so. It'll be the first thing I do when I wake up, is to just go in and grade and give you feedback to let you know how you're doing, how correct you are on your work, to make sure that you have had every opportunity to clarify your understanding and your thinking, to be prepared for your quiz on Friday. And those of you who are doing this in class, you're going to have 10 minutes at the conclusion of this video to check your answers with each other to make sure you have done the best that you can before you take the quiz. Good luck. Bye.